Okay, so here is our, hopefully you can see my screen okay?
Yeah.
My head. So what we're going to finish up the our section on Kedushat HaYom, the sanctification of the day. This was the middle section of the Amidah, specifically for Shabbat. We almost got to the end. We're going to finish that up today. And then we're going to go on to the next section, the Avodah section, which talks about the sacrificial service. And we're going to do it slightly out of order so that we can focus on the special prayer for Hanukkah, which seemed appropriate to do today. So, all right. Okay, so this is a little bit of repetition. If you are in your Siddur Sim Shalom for Shabbat and festivals, we're on page 117, and this is the third paragraph on the page. So this is the Shabbat, the Amidah for Shabbat Shacharit in the middle section. I'll just as a review, I'll kind of quickly I'll just read this one in English. And you did not give it, Adonai our God, to the nations of the land, it being Shabbat. And you did not bequeath it, our king, to the idol worshippers. And indeed, in its rest shall not dwell the uncircumcised. For to Israel, your people, you gave it in love, to the seed of Jacob, that in them you chose. A people that sanctifies the seventh, all of them will be satisfied and delighted by your goodness. And the seventh, you accepted it and sanctified it. The favorite of days, you called it, a memory of the work of creation. All right, so we have this contrast between the rest of the peoples of the world who don't have the Shabbat as a gift and the Jewish people, which has been given this special gift of the Sabbath. And we also looked at this passage from Isaiah. This is how we ended up. I'm not going to reread it. I just want to point out that the word of oneg, v'karata l'Shabbat oneg, you shall call the Sabbath an oneg, which is a delight. And then in the next verse, az tit anag al Adonai, then you can seek the favor, then you will delight in the Lord. Right? So we have this this idea introduced here in Isaiah that Shabbat has to be delightful in some way. And that when we do that, then we are able to be in God's good graces. We are able to delight in God, which is, I think, a wonderful thing to emphasize on Shabbat. So that's where we kind of left off last week. And now I want to ask a question. Who is it who sanctifies the Shabbat? Who sanctifies the Shabbat? So let's see if we can answer that question. Let's start with Genesis. This is the very end of the 7 days of creation. Vayvarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i vaykadesh oto ki vo Shabbat mikol malachto asher bara Elohim la'asot. We say this for the Friday night Kiddush, right? So, and God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that he had done. All right, so who makes Shabbat holy? Who sanctifies the Sabbath according to this verse?
Must be God.
It's got to be God, right? So God is the only subject in this sentence, right? And what does that mean? You know, if we could extrapolate from this, what makes the Sabbath holy?
God said it was.
God's declaration.
Yeah.
Right? There's an element of blessing.
Behavior.
Of blessing here.
Mm-hmm.
And we also,
so this is the day after he's done all the work, or she has done all the work.
Yeah.
And it's the day of resting, but also reflecting on that and earning that kind of day, the Shabbat.
Yeah, there's this idea, the word Shabbat itself means to cease from labor. So we have a lot of ideas that seem to be wrapped up in the nature of the holiness of Shabbat, right? We've got stopping work, we have blessing, we have reflection upon the previous 6 days of creation. And of course, none of this is meaningful if we don't have the work that took place in the previous 6 days. But in all of it, it's very clear that it's God who has made a decision here that the Sabbath is to be holy. And then we have Jeremiah. V'im lo tishma'u elai lekadesh et yom haShabbat ulevilti se'et masa uvo b'sha'arei Yerushalayim b'yom haShabbat v'itzatati eish b'sha'areha v'ochla armanot Yerushalayim v'lo tichbeh. But if you do not obey my command to hallow, and the word is lekadesh, to sanctify the Sabbath day, and to carry in no burdens through the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will set fire to its gates. It shall consume the fortresses of Jerusalem, and it shall not be extinguished. All right, so what do we have? Jeremiah is haranguing the people. That's what prophets do. They haranguing the people because they, well, what are they doing? That is
The work on Shabbat.
right, and specifically they're doing business, right? They're carrying burdens into the gates of the city of Jerusalem, right? The gates, that's where the marketplace is, right? You're coming and going. So we have this idea of first of all, carrying, but masa is a burden, but it's the term masau matan is to transact business, right? So here we talk about like, what does it mean to work on Shabbat? Here Jeremiah is actually talking about commercial activity specifically, right? So in this particular context, but who is the subject of sanctifying the Sabbath day in this verse?
Israel.
Right?
People.
Right, the people, right? That's the people. And how are the people to sanctify it? Here it seems to be they're sanctifying it by ceasing from labor, right? Stopping the business of the rest of the week, just like God did in the previous passage. But we have this interesting idea that both God and Israel have a role in sanctifying Shabbat. And somehow that we're able to emulate God in, let's say, working for 6 days of the week, and then on the seventh day coming to rest. And that's how we sanctify the Sabbath as well.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So what about Isaiah 12?
All right. What does Isaiah 12 say?
It says, new moon and Sabbath, proclaiming solemnities, assemblies with iniquity, I cannot abide. Your new moons and fixed seasons fill me with loathing.
Read the whole verse again.
Okay, I'll go to the beginning of 12.
Okay.
That you come to appear before me, who ask that of you, trample my courts no more, bringing oblations is futile, incense is offensive to me, new moon and Sabbath, proclaiming of solemnities, assemblies with iniquity, I cannot abide. Your new moons and fixed seasons fill me with loathing, they are become a burden to me, I cannot endure them.
So what this sound, I mean, I need to look at it in a little bit more detail. I'm just trying to quickly get to it. Chapter 12, what verse is it?
It's the end of verse 12 is where they quotes the Sabbath, where he mentions Sabbath.
Which chapter?
1.
Okay.
Sorry. It's that whole section where all of the religious practices, because they're not done with the right spirit, do nothing but anger God because the people aren't being good people.
Yeah. So this has to do with the ritual observance of all of these holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of, I don't think the word kadosh appears here. So the people are kind of going through the ritual motions, but they're not behaving morally correctly by taking care of the widow and the orphan.
Right.
And so God is basically rejecting their worship because they've kind of missed the point. Right. But but I think that the mention of Shabbat and new moon there are done kind of in the list of other ritual observances that
It seems to cover it seems to cover the whole gamut from temple to everything else.
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's plenty of times where Shabbat is mentioned in the Bible, but we have this idea of holiness, and Shabbat is holy somehow. But who makes Shabbat holy? I gave a sermon, I don't know when, they all kind of blend together for me at some point, probably for you too. But is the Sabbath holy if there's nobody there to observe it? Right? Does it have any intrinsic holiness?
Did we study that in Genesis Rabbah? And wasn't it there this thing about they were even asking if but doesn't the rain fall on the Sabbath? And then God said, well, the rabbi said that there are these angels that do every little task, and they were set up ahead of time, so it's okay.
But yeah, so it's not actual work for God, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Sabbath is inherently different than every other day, even in nature, except it was this conundrum.
Well, in halakha, Shabbat happens every 7 days, period, right? Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, that does not necessarily happen on a fixed schedule, as it's originally conceived of by the rabbis. The Rosh Chodesh is determined by the court, right? They have to receive testimony from witnesses, and so it's completely human dependent, based on observation, not based on what actually is happening astronomically. And so and that's significant because the holidays are dependent upon when Rosh Chodesh is, when the new month is, right? We know it could be one of 2 days, and depending on which of those days that the Sanhedrin declares, that will determine 14 days later or 15 days later when the holiday takes place in that month. So we have this idea that the holidays are set by human beings, in contrast to Shabbat, which is set by God.
But in Isaiah, it's basically saying because the people aren't doing it right, that I don't guess it doesn't say that it's not holy, but it
Yeah.
the practice is then all messed up.
Isaiah is not haranguing the people in that particular passage for not observing Shabbat. Isaiah is haranguing them for not taking care of the orphans and the widows.
Correct. But
Right?
then God's willing to throw everything out.
Presumably they're doing, they're observing Shabbat correctly, at least in whatever correctly means in Isaiah's day. Right? Because God is saying, I don't care about all these things you're doing on Shabbat. Right? So meaning they're observing Shabbat, but they're just not doing the other stuff that they're supposed to be doing. All right, anyway, let's not get bogged down in that. I wanted to bring these two verses because they each introduce the idea of sanctifying the Sabbath day. So this is back that same paragraph, the third paragraph, and I kind of brought out just this one line: Am mikadeshei shvi'i, kulam yisbeu v'yitangu mituvecha, v'hashvi'i ratzita bo v'kidashto. So Am mikadeshei shvi'is, the nation or the people who sanctifies the seventh day, right? Makadeshei. So Makadeshei is a hif'il, PL verb, which is very active. We're making it holy. We're making the seventh day holy. So here it's the people. Israel is the one who is sanctifying the Sabbath day. And then what does it say? Kulam yisbeu v'yitangu mituvecha. All of them will be satisfied and delighted by your goodness. Does that sound like Isaiah? He talks about if we make the Sabbath a delight, then we'll be a delight for God. God will be a delight for us. So this seems to be drawing upon Isaiah. And then v'hashvi'i ratzita bo v'kidashto. And the seventh, you accepted it and sanctified it. So now we have God doing the sanctification of the seventh day. So we have this interesting partnership that this prayer seems to be blending together, right? That both Israel and God have a role in sanctifying the Sabbath day.
So is that you a capital Y?
Yes,
Okay.
you with a capital Y.
Thank you.
What was the difference between how Isaiah views the Sabbath and Jeremiah?
I'll look it back up. Okay, so Isaiah, this is Isaiah 58. It's kind of a messianic, not in like the Messiah context, but in more like a the troubles of the world will come to the end, and Israel will be restored. So he's seeming to hold out hope, right? That if you observe Shabbat and make it a delight, then you're going to get all these rewards, right? You're going You can seek the favor of the Lord. I'll set you astride the heights of the earth. Let you enjoy the heritage of your father Jacob. Right? You'll return from exile. You'll get the land back. All of these things. So that seems to be what Isaiah is talking about. But he seems to be speaking to a people in exile as well. So they're observing Shabbat in exile.
Okay.
Rabbi, doesn't that line Am Mekadosh Sheni appear somewhere else? I have this melody in my head. Am Mekadosh Sheni. Where does that come from? Yeah.
It's right after the Kedushat in the Amida
Oh, okay.
Mm.
That's why I remember it.
on Shabbat.
Yeah, that's what we just looked at.
This is from Ismechu B'Malchutcha.
Yes.
Okay, so now this is the last paragraph on page 117, the one that brings in the Chatima, the closing blessing of Mekadesh HaShabbat. So we begin, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, our God and God of our ancestors. Very common beginning of a prayer. Ritzei v'mnuchatenu. Ritzei means to accept something. Accept our rest. I love that idea, that rest is an act of worship, right? Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha v'ten chalkenu b'toratecha. Sanctify us, make us holy with your commandments, and give us a portion in your Torah. Sabe'enu mituvecha v'samchenu b'shuatecha. Satisfy us from your goodness, and cause us to rejoice in your salvation. V'taher libeinu la'ovdecha be'emet. And purify our hearts to serve you in truth. V'anchilenu Adonai Eloheinu b'avav ratzon Shabbat kodshecha. Grant us, Adonai our God, lovingly and willingly your holy Sabbath. V'yanuchu v'Yisrael mekadeshei shemecha, so that Israel, who sanctify your name, may rest upon it, on it. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you Adonai, mekadesh HaShabbat, who sanctifies the Sabbath. All right, what themes do you pick up in this paragraph?
Seems like sanctifying the Sabbath is a partnership between God and the people.
Are the people doing any sanctifying of the Sabbath here?
By resting.
Right, but the sanctifying seems to be back to God in this one, right? So we're resting.
It's enough to rest, or you have to perform the rituals of Shabbat to be fully, observant.
Well, maybe we're implying, we're talking about commandments and Torah and serving God in truth. That the implied is that we're following the mitzvot.
Okay.
But we want to have the opportunity to be able to do so, right?
But if we don't rest, we mess the whole thing up. So that's why I see it as a partnership.
Yes, I think that's true. Yeah. Now I want to point out something, that the final closing blessing, Mekadesh HaShabbat, God sanctifies the Sabbath day. That's what this is saying. It's very clear that it's God who sanctifies Shabbat. When we get to a holiday on Yom Tov, we say Mekadesh HaShabbat v'Yisrael v'Hazmanim. Right? So we add the word. So if this was Shabbat and Yom Tov, we would say God sanctifies the Sabbath, v'Yisrael and Israel, v'Hazmanim, and the times, the sacred occasions. So a couple things. Pay attention to the order. We have Shabbat coming first because there's a general principle that whichever is more frequent comes first in halakha, when you've got, say, two different mitzvot to fulfill, whichever one is a more frequent one you do first. So Shabbat comes first, it's every week. And then we're adding Israel and the festivals, right? So why Israel, and why does Israel come before festivals? And the reason is because Israel is the one responsible for declaring the festivals, right? Without Israel to set the calendar, then we don't know what day the festival is going to be on. And the whole concept of saying this bracha is about acknowledging the sanctity of the day. When the Beit Din would declare that they've accepted the witnesses' testimony that they saw the new moon, they would indicate that by saying mikudash, mikudash, sanctified, sanctified, right? Because it's the people that are in charge of sanctifying it, right? Setting the calendar is a holy action, as halacha understands it. This bracha mekadesh Shabbat is also what we use for kiddush. So Friday night, we're saying kiddush, and what we're doing is we're acknowledging that Shabbat is holy. Shabbat's kind of intrinsically holy, but and our role in that is to kind of make this testimony of that, to kind of publicly acknowledge that that Shabbat is a holy thing.
What does that public acknowledgement do? Isn't that our sanctification of the day also through Kiddush?
Yeah, so that's what Kiddush is.
So
Right?
God sanctifies the Sabbath and we sanctify the Sabbath. Both.
Yeah, or we kind of acknowledge the holiness of the Sabbath. Yeah. All right. Any other questions on this section? All right, let's go on to the next section. We have finished Kedushat HaYom. We are now on Avodah. So Avodah, we've talked about this term. It means worship, it means work or labor or the sacrificial service, right? So the same term has a number of different meanings. When the rabbis talk about Avodah, they're generally speaking specifically about the sacrificial ritual. When they say the world stands on three things, on Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim. So Torah is Torah. Avodah, by that they mean the temple ritual, the sacrifices. Avodah and Gemilut Chasadim, acts of love and kindness. So the next section of the Amidah is called the Avodah. And here we're kind of transitioning into the final three blessings of the Amidah. Every single Amidah has it closes with these final three blessings. In our Siddurim, if you are in the Siddur for Shabbat and festivals, it's on page 118. It begins with Ritzeh. If you are in Sim Shalom for weekdays, it's on page 41. Okay, so I want to bring us back to a Mishnah that we've looked at a few times. Sorry if it's too gray to read it all. This was from the Mishnah Tamid. Tamid refers to the daily offering in the temple, and it goes through in quite a bit of detail what takes place in the temple on a regular basis. So it's a very good record, at least of the practice in the late Second Temple period. So we have the deputy high priest, the superintendent, said to them, which is the Kohanim who are on duty, Barchu bracha achat v'hein barchu. Say a blessing, say the one blessing, and then they blessed. Then they read the 10 Commandments, the Shema, the Vayayim Shemoah, and the Vayomer. So the Shema with all three paragraphs that we still recite today. Barchu et ha'am shalosh brachot. They bless the people with three blessings: Emet v'yatziv, and Avodah, and Birkat Kohanim. The priestly benediction. Umosifin bracha achat uvashabbat mosifin bracha achat lemishmar yotzei. And on Shabbat they added a blessing to be said by the watch which was leaving. So I'm pointing this out because the word avodah appears in here. We're not talking about the liturgy that's in our Siddur. We're talking about a different liturgy that took place in the temple and was recited by the priests, really on behalf of, or maybe directed to, the whatever Israelites happened to be present, maybe on vacation or something. And one of them included some sort of blessing that they referred to as the Avodah. So Avodah refers to the temple worship. So presumably there is a prayer of some sort that has been composed that is meant to accompany the regular temple offerings. Maybe it's a way of asking for our prayers to be, our sacrifices to be accepted, but before you. We'll get to this in a moment, but it's in the context of this particular blessing. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit. No, I'm not jumping myself. All right, so it's in the context of the Avodah blessing that we kind of introduce the closing part of our service. Now, we're going to quickly jump ahead to 119 in the Shabbat Siddur and to 42 in the weekday Siddur. And this HaNissim comes in the context of actually the next bracha, which is called Hoda'ah, which means thanks or gratefully acknowledging. We'll get to all of these things, but we're going to do this now because it's Hanukkah. And let me just move my face out of the way. Put it that way. There we go. Okay, so we begin HaNissim. HaNissim ve'ala purkan ve'ala gvurot ve'ala teshuot ve'ala milchamot she'asita la'avotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. So remember, this is in the context of a prayer of thanksgiving. And so we say HaNissim for the miracles and for the purkan, the deliverance, ve'al ha'gvurot, we've had that word, the mighty acts, ve'al ha'teshuot, and for the triumphs, ve'al ha'milchamot, and for the wars, she'asita la'avotenu, that you did for our ancestors, bayamim hahem, in those days, bazman hazeh, in this time. Point out that what's the second blessing that we say when we light the Hanukkah candles? She'asa nisim la'avotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. So we have nisim, she'asa nisim, that you did the miracles, la'avotenu, for our ancestors, in those days and in these times. So the bracha, the second bracha for lighting Hanukkah candles shares some of the same language as this prayer. Now, HaNissim doesn't say anything specifically about Hanukkah. It's also said, and you can see this in our Siddur, it's recited on Purim. And in recent times, we've used this prayer to also say on Yom HaAtzmaut, right? So it's a prayer of acknowledging deliverance, kind of, it's like national holidays of the Jewish people. And then there's an additional holiday-specific prayer that is appended to it that's specific to each particular holiday. So let's look at that. All right. Bimei Matityahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol. In the days of Matityahu, the son of Yochanan, the high priest. That is not true. Matityahu was not the son of the high priest. Matityahu was kind of an out-of-favor priest living off in the country. Their big complaint was that the high priest was being controlled by a bunch of assimilating Greek-loving people who were bringing all sorts of abominations into it. That's why they rebelled in the first place. In any event, Chashmonai Uvanav, the Hasmonean, and his sons, Kshamda Malchut Yavan Harisha'a Alamcha Yisrael, and when the wicked kingdom of Greece stood against your people Israel, Lahashkicham Toratecha, to cause them to forget your Torah, Olahaviram Mechukei Ritzonecha, and to make them leave the laws of your will, Ve'ata Barachamecha Harabim, and you, in your great mercy, Amadata Lahem, you stood up for them, right? So we had the kingdom of Greece standing up, the wicked kingdom of Greece standing up against your people, and now God is standing up for the people. Be'et Saratam, at the time of their distress, Ravta et Rivam, they fought their fights, Danta Dinam, you judged their judgments, Nakamta Nikmatam, you avenged their vengeances, All right, so we've got lots of alliterations here. Masarta giborim biad chalashim. You delivered the heroes, the mighty, into the hands of the weak. Right? Barabim biad ma'atim, and the many into the hands of the few. Utmeim biad taharim, the impure into the hands of the pure. Rishaim biad tzadikim, the wicked into the hands of the righteous. Vizedim biad oskei toratecha, and the arrogant into the hands of those who are engaged in your Torah. Ulecha asita shem gadol v'kadosh ba'olamecha, and for you, like for your own sake, you made a great and holy name in your world, right? So God, part of God doing this is that God is doing his own Kiddush Hashem, so to speak, making God's name great in the world. Ula amcha Yisrael, and for your people Israel, asita teshua gedola ufurkan kehayom hazeh. For your people Israel, you brought a great triumph and deliverance. This is a little strange, but on that, something like on that very day, really kehayom hazeh is like on this day. It's a little, translation's a little unclear to me. Ve'achar kain, and after that, ba'u vanecha lidvir beitecha, your children came into your sacred house, or into the sanctum of your house. Ufinu et heichalecha, they cleared out your sanctuary. V'tiaru et mikdashecha, they purified your sanctuary. V'hidliku nerot bechatzrot kodshecha, they lit the lights in your holy courts. V'kav'u shmonat yemei Chanukah elu, they established these 8 days of Hanukkah, lehodot ulahalel l'shimcha hagadol, to gratefully acknowledge and to praise your great name. All right, that's a mouthful. What's the message? What's the story of Hanukkah as being described here?
God helped the small Jewish people defeat the big enemy.
Okay. Good. Other themes?
Well, I almost see this kind of ABA structure where it starts with the people who are rebelling against the Greeks, and then God comes in and avenges vengeance and delivers the many into the hands of the few. And then the people are back to the temple, purify the sanctuary, and do those things. So it's kind of a God sandwich.
Okay, good. What's missing? What's missing from this story of Hanukkah?
You mean the
The
reason?
oil.
The oil.
The oil, the miracle of the oil.
So
No
it doesn't
mention.
say why 8 nights of Hanukkah, 8 days.
Sorry?
It doesn't say why 8 days of Hanukkah.
No, it says they established 8 days of Hanukkah. Who established them?
The people.
The people, right? The Maccabees, or the Hasmonean, Matityahu's sons. They established the days of Hanukkah. Exactly right. No mention of the miracle of the oil.
Yeah.
Not at all, right? The kindling the lights is really it's a little kind of just one thing that they did, right? It's not a focus in this prayer, right? This is about restoring the temple. That's what now, if you read the books of the Maccabees, we're not going to do that right now. This is exactly what it says in the books of the Maccabees. All right, which is not, it's not considered to be sacred literature by the rabbis. It is included in the Apocrypha in the Catholic Bible.
Who wrote the book of the Maccabees?
The Maccabees did. I mean, their court. It was written. I mean, the first and the second book, I think one of them was written like in the 120s, and another one like around the 100 or some BCE. So, while the Hasmoneans were still in charge, were still ruling as both kings and priests after they won. So what does it say about it is that they fought for 3 years, from 167 to 164 before the Common Era. In the third year of that fight, they recaptured the temple. They went in, they found the temple grounds completely defiled, and they had to go and clean it all up and repurify it. And then the first thing they did was they reestablished the daily offerings, the Tamid offerings, which part of the Tamid offerings was lighting the 7-branched menorah every single day of the year. 365 days a year. The menorah in the courtyard of the temple gets lit every single morning,
on Shabbos.
including on Shabbos.
How?
It's a shvut. It's allowed in the temple. It's not allowed anywhere else. It's allowed in the temple.
Is that
So-
why we distinguish the menorah from the Hanukkah, which is the
8 branches.
for Hanukkah only?
Yeah, I mean that was kind of a modern Hebrew innovation that we needed a special name for the for that. But I mean the rabbis didn't have Hanukkah. For them it was just menorah. Menorah just means lamp.
I
But the
see.
menorah was in the courtyard or inside the temple?
So you've got, let's say, the outer courtyard, the inner courtyard, the holy, and the holy of holies, right? So the menorah stood in the holy, just outside of the holy of holies,
Mhm.
right? And it was lit every day, all 7 branches. And so what this says, what it says in the books of the Maccabees is that, among all of the other things they did to reestablish the daily offerings is they also added the lights, which is the lighting of the lights, which is what they're supposed to do, right? There's nothing about lighting lights as a way to observe Hanukkah. Something else they did, they established Hanukkah as an 8-day festival on the 25th of Kislev every year to celebrate their victory and God's deliverance of them from, the wicked hands of the Greeks, just like it says in this prayer. What else did they do? They gave instructions about how to worship it, right? They're going to worship it by singing praises to God. Hallel, lehalel. So we say Hallel on Hanukkah, right? It's acknowledged here, like the last 4 words, lehodot ulahalel l'shimcha hagadol, to give praise to your great name. So it says it in HaNissim. It also says it in the books of the Maccabees, right? So the reason we say Hallel is not because the rabbis said so, it's because the Maccabees said so, right? And then the rabbis in the Talmud get this story, and they've got to decide what to do with it. So they turn it into a discussion mostly of halakha. They get a little bit into the history. They introduce this legend about the oil burning for 8 days when it was only enough for 1. But that story appears in the Babylonian Talmud hundreds of years afterwards. So and there's also a bit of a historical description about the battle and how the Maccabees, when they built the menorah, they at first they didn't have any money, so they built it out of spears, and then they coated it with, I think, silver or something, and then when they had some more money a few years later, they coated it with gold, right? So they talk about, but they're not talking about the menorah that we light on Hanukkah. They're talking about the menorah that stood in the middle of the temple. Somehow the lighting of lights became kind of the rabbis' main focus for the holiday, main halachic focus for the holiday. It was not the focus of the Maccabees. HaNissim really seems to be much more in line with what it says in the book of the Maccabees than what appears in the Talmud. Which is
the HaNissim document?
Sorry?
Where is the HaNissim document?
It's in our Siddur. It's in
the Siddur.
Yeah, it's we say it in the for the 8 days of Hanukkah. In every Amidah, we say HaNissim towards the end of the Amidah. It's put in the middle of the section on giving thanks. The second from the last blessing of the Amidah. And you see that word lehodot as well. Lehodot is to give thanks. So that's where it gets placed in the liturgy. It's also included in Birkat Hamazon. So two places. I think it's a medieval prayer. This prayer is not in the Talmud. So
Interesting that was
Do we know anything about the oil and
Provided
wine
to be
took
put
8
into the
days to
Siddur.
purify or make? Is that reflected anywhere
Go
else?
Sherry first, and then Max.
Oh, I just said it's interesting that they chose to put that into the Siddur for Hanukkah. I just think because it dates so far back and then doesn't really relate to the modern notion of Hanukkah.
What do you mean by the modern notion of Hanukkah?
Well, the whole thing about the oil and all of that is
Why is
missing.
that? Why is that the dominant story of Hanukkah?
Sorry?
Why would you assume that is the dominant story of Hanukkah?
Good question. I think because as we celebrate it on a superficial level, that's what you think about. You think about the 8 days, the oil lasting 8 days, the story of the Maccabees, that all that is, is what we think about. That's why this is very interesting to think sort of at another level.
I think the story of the oil, the miracle of the oil, makes a good story to tell children.
Right.
Um,
Right, of course. And we need something that matches Christmas for celebration and all of that for Jewish kids.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, this is normative. This is a mainstream prayer. So this, you can see that we've got a different emphasis here, a very different emphasis here. There's also something of a nationalist emphasis as well, right? This is about military victory that we're talking about. For the rabbis, shortly after in the couple of centuries after the destruction of the temple, they're not necessarily interested in provoking dreams of Jewish nationalism. Right? HaNissim is coming at a different time. Maybe people need something different. Yeah. Max, what were you were saying something?
Yeah, about the oil and it takes 8 days to make more oil. Is there any basis in that? Do we read anything and how the oil was made as to why it would take 8 days, or is this just part of the legend?
So the issue is not oil per se, it's pure oil. Right? So oil, so the particular kind of oil that they need is really, first cold pressed, extra virgin first cold pressed, right? That's the oil that they need, right? And in addition, it can't have become defiled by contact with a corpse or anything else that can confer ritual defilement. And so if you've got a container of oil, the only way to know that it has not been defiled is if it's double sealed, right? So in terms of like within that legend, when they say they couldn't find any pure oil for lighting the menorah, what they're saying is that whatever oil they found it had become defiled, right? The temple, it was smeared in pig's blood, right? They were doing all sorts of nasty stuff. So it rendered everything impure. So they could find one vessel of oil that, let's say, still had its double seal on it and no more. And now they've got to make more. So you've got to go and harvest some olives and press them and bottle, do all the things that you need to do. And it seems, at least as the story tells it, that that's a process that takes 8 days. Is that true? I don't know. You'd have to ask an olive grower.
Was this pure oil used just for Hanukkah, or was it also for every day when they lived?
No. This is oil that was used every day of the year for the Tamid offering, right? Yeah. This is what you do every day when you make the Tamid offering. Is that you get up before dawn, and a priest draws lots, and they one group of priests get the job of cleaning up the menorah, basically removing all the soot and junk that had accumulated for the previous 24 hours. And then another cadre of priests gets the honor of lighting it. And so they light it, and they go light it in a particular order. This happened every day of the year. And it was olive oil and a wick that had to be used.
So 2 years ago, when I was in New Delhi during Hanukkah, they lit the menorah with oil and wick. Mm-hmm. They didn't have wax candles.
Oh, candles are super expensive in ancient days.
What's piquing my interest here then is why the rabbis chose to not ignore this holiday. I mean, if you have a book that's not even in the canon, and if you're just looking at it as a military victory, why this, not something that Saul did or something that David did or Joshua did? What's so important about it that they wanted to include it and yet not include the book into the canon? I mean, that the book isn't in the canon. So why not just ignore it or just mention it in passing?
My theory is that it was too popular.
Stop there for a second. Let me digest that. What do you mean? So what would people have been doing to make it popular?
What were people doing? They were lighting lights and and singing Hallel and going on parades through the streets with, I mean, that's what the Maccabees, in the books of the Maccabees, it talks about, they went on parades through the streets with thursai, which are palm branches. And they declared that this should be an 8-day holiday that should be observed throughout all time. Right?
But were people doing that in exile? I mean, people in Babylonia weren't doing that, so they could have ignored it. I mean, unless it must be part then of the Yerushalmi too.
No, I think that the people, remember when the Talmud's getting started, the rabbis are very small and their influence is small.
Yeah.
So you have a widespread holiday. By the way, at a time when everybody has a holiday, everybody has a winter solstice holiday.
Exactly.
Right. So what is it? Is it Saturnalia? I think is the Roman one.
Yeah. Saturnalia is Roman, yes.
Right. On the 25th of the month.
Right.
Sound familiar?
Yeah,
that's
really.
why the Christians decide. That's why the Christians decided to have their own holiday.
Right, you get Christmas.
Saturnalia.
We have Hanukkah on the 25th day of the month. Sound like this is a day that's got like there's stuff going on, right? So if you're Jewish, you don't want to be left out.
That's why we got to change the Kislev to the calendar that we use so that it always coincides with Christmas.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Well, why did it take us so long then to have a winter holiday? And especially when we had the temple, why not have a big whoop-de-doo? I mean, we had all the...
Oh, so like what was happening before the Maccabees on the 25th?
You know, because we had all the things when we brought the produce, all the harvest holidays or something like that. So we could have had a holiday of lights if that was such a big whoop-de-doo.
That's interesting. Yeah, so was there some sort of winter solstice holiday observed in the temple prior to Hanukkah?
There should have been.
That's an interesting question. It would make sense if there was something. Yeah, so this is a very I think a very fascinating topic, because you're talking about just how holidays kind of migrate between traditions and then are reinterpreted, right? And the rabbis themselves do that, right? They take something that was really it was a military national holiday and they halachicize it. Most of the discussion is about exactly where you need to position the menorah, and do you light the candles you light the lights in this direction or in this direction? How many is it, just for each person or for one per household? Like that's what they seem to care about, just based on the amount of ink that is spent on it in the Talmud.
Right.
So, which in some senses seems to be missing the point, or maybe they're trying to send a message. Maybe they're trying to take a popular holiday and change the emphasis of that holiday maybe they're trying to demilitarize the holiday because they don't want, I mean, this is the story of the rabbi's origin story, is sneaking out of Jerusalem before the temple was destroyed, before the Romans destroyed the temple, making a deal with the Romans to allow them to escape and reestablish their Sanhedrin in Yavne, right? They are, the rabbis are accommodationists to the Romans.
So why didn't the rabbis include a text about Hanukkah related to that stuff, the halacha of it, rather than the non-canonized text?
Well, I mean, there's nothing in here that the rabbis didn't agree with. I mean, this is certainly everything here is kosher.
Yeah, but they're focusing on the yes, it was God who defeated, the enemy in the military encounter, but other than that, they're talking about the historical part and not about the halacha that they developed about it.
Yeah,
Well,
so there's
you
there's a song we sing. What's it? And I'm blanking on the, hold on.
Well, the rabbi mentioned that this prayer was written in medieval times. So I think that to the question of why did the rabbis not include something, you know, it's,
Yeah.
I guess they didn't include anything in the Amidah about Hanukkah, and this was added 1,000 years later.
Yeah. So there's a Hanerot Halalu, one of the songs we sing for Hanukkah. Hanerot Halalu, anachnu madlikim, Hanerot Halalu. Al HaNissim ve'al HaNiflaot ve'al HaTeshuot ve'al HaMilchamot. Right, so we're quoting Al HaNissim up here. She'asita la'avoteinu bayamim ahem bazman hazeh. But then it goes on. Al yedei kohanecha hakdoshim, right? By the hands of your holy priests. And then the last verse is ve'ein lanu reshut lehishtamesh bahem, which is we do not have permission to use them. Right? Ki kodeshem, because they are holy, right? But that's rabbinic, right? We're not allowed to use the Hanukkah candles because they're holy. They're there in order to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah. We don't specify which miracle we're talking about, but because that is their function, we can't use them. We can't benefit from them in any way. We can't read, you can't read by the light of the Chanukiah. Unlike the Shabbat candles, whose purpose is to provide light in the home so that you can use it. So that's one of the songs we sing, which kind of integrates both the rabbinic version and the kind of the nationalist version of the prayer.
Would it be a fair take on the things that you've said? This somewhere in my mind is the Maccabees killing somebody who's who wants to accommodate, and so that kind of zealotry then go into have the battle.
That's how the rebellion starts.
So if that's the case, then what you were saying about the Yavna story, so that's exactly in opposition to the decision that we made for survival. So there are two survival stories here. One is that you don't accommodate and you go in and you try to kill everybody, even if it means that you're all going to be wiped out. The other is that you look for a way that you can save the remnant and continue to survive and accommodate. So two stories. The rabbis have control of the latter story, and maybe that's why they have to change the Maccabean story.
Depends on if you're going against Greeks or Romans.
Why would that matter? Why would that matter?
Because the Maccabees were opposing the Greeks and the rabbis were opposing the Romans.
But philosophically, why
philosophically, no.
Yeah.
Either one is a threat to your existence, right?
So the books of the Maccabees were written after the Maccabees won, right? So the war does not end in the year 174. The war ends in 142 BCE. It takes 35 years for them to kick the Greeks out and to really have independence. Then the Hasmoneans establish a new kingdom, the Hasmonean kingdom, with themselves as the kings and high priests, right? So you have a king priest, which was really not kosher, but they managed to remain in charge and completely independent till the year, I think, 63 BCE, when Pompey, the Roman, came in and kind of took over, and then it became a kind of a vassal state of Rome, but still had its local king, still had its Maccabean kings, until you get to Herod, and Herod is kind of half a Maccabee, or he tries to claim some sort of bloodline through the Hasmoneans, because that's where his authority comes from. And then he kills off everybody else from the Hasmonean line because they'd be a threat to him. He was kind of a paranoid megalomaniac, but that's all on a side. So essentially, you've got 150 years or so of Hasmonean rule, and they're writing the books of the Maccabees at a time when they have achieved total independence. So when you've achieved total independence, you of course are going to celebrate your military victories. That is exactly what you do. And
Okay.
there is a book called Megillat Ta'anit, the Scroll of Fasts. And it is a Second Temple era document. It's referred to in the Talmud, it's quoted extensively in the Talmud. And it's got really a Gemara on Megillat Ta'anit. What Megillat Ta'anit is a list of days on which it is forbidden to declare a public fast. And so what that list is a list of basically the civic national holidays of the Hasmonean dynasty, right? So I'll give you an example. On the 13th of Adar, it is forbidden to declare a fast. What is the 13th of Adar? What do we know that as?
Purim.
Nope, the day before
No.
Purim. Hanit Esther, the fast of Esther.
Fast of Esther, yeah.
Right, but according to the Megillat Ta'anit, it is forbidden to fast on the 13th of Adar. Why? Because it is Yom Nicanor, Nicanor Day. That's the day when the Hasmoneans defeated the general Nicanor, right? So it became a national holiday, right? Because that's what you do to celebrate your military victories. If you are following Greek tradition, and any good Greek knows that you, when you have a big victory in battle, you declare a holiday for all future generations to observe as a way to remember how mighty and heroic you were. So that's what the Greeks do. That's what the Hasmoneans did as well. So they have a whole list of holidays that they declare as these national holidays when it's forbidden to fast. And so then there's a discussion in the Talmud, I think it's in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Tractate Rosh Hashanah, which talks about that Megillat Ta'anit has become canceled except for the following few days, right? So the rabbis say that all of these national holidays, many of which are celebrating military victories from the Hasmoneans, they no longer apply, except for a few, right? And so included among the few are Hanukkah, the days of Hanukkah. So it's forbidden to fast during Hanukkah. You're not supposed to give a eulogy during Hanukkah, right? So there's a few practices that are kind of bundled together. And yeah, so why did some survive and most of the days not survive? Probably because I would guess that because they were too beloved among the people and the rabbis couldn't get rid of them. But under the Hasmonean kings, the rabbis' predecessors, the Pharisees, were out of favor. At least in the documents that we have describing them, they were out of favor. They did not have the ear of the king. It was the Sadducees being the Tzadokite priests. That's what Sadducees are. The line from the Tzadokite priests. They were the ones who, they were aristocrats. They had the ear of those who were in authority, and the Pharisees did not. So whatever the interpretation, kind of the halachic interpretations that the Pharisees might have had, or the theological beliefs, the people in charge did not agree with them. And but that eventually leads to the rabbis, and the rabbis pick up their legacy from the Pharisees. We have a lot of stories, not a lot, but we have some stories in the Talmuds that are describing stories during the Hasmonean reigns. And so they appear in the Talmud. We have stories in Josephus as well, and there's often a lot of overlap between those stories. And so we can compare those. We can compare the books of the Maccabees. So there's a number of historical texts that are describing this period of time. But so how does a particular practice, a particular holiday, what gives it lasting power, right? So all the holidays in the Torah, right? They've got the authority of the Torah, right? We've got Purim. Purim has its own book. It's in the Torah. And then we've got Hanukkah, which is not in the Bible. But so how did it survive? Well, I think that's why.
Thank you.
So that's my theory anyways. All right, I think this is probably a good place for us to stop. Having finished the HaNissim. So